Good morning, everybody. It is 11 a.m. and we'll go ahead and get started. Looks like we got another really great turnout. Thanks for coming. Today's topic, introductions first. Just as we've done the past few, my name is Peter Kaiser. I have Joel Terensky and Jason Wines on the line as well. They're going to wave and say hi. They'll be answering questions through the chat. Not necessarily through the chat, through the question function that you have there in your little interface. So today's topic, keyframes and treatments. We've kind of hit, as I promise I won't recap every webinar that happened prior to this one, but we first talked about the hardware. Then we had one that talked about how to set up the configuration and the new configuration manager. The last one was about command keys, which is a pretty in-depth topic. I have a feeling that after we have the discussion today about keyframes and treatments, that's going to definitely facilitate everybody's knowledge about command keys as well, because it directly applies to that. So let's get started. So what we have, I will share my screen here real quick. And I'm assuming everybody can see my screen. Someone just give me a nod, or maybe one of my co-parts had different little things. So you should be able to see.
Yep, we can see you.
All right, perfect. Okay, so what is a keyframe? Okay, when we think about Spyder, we think about layers and pixel spaces and everything. So a keyframe is a layer property. Okay, it's anything having to do with a layer. It's not something specific to a source or maybe even a still image, because sources and stills can be applied to layers. So layer properties would include position, right? Relative versus absolute. We're going to kind of toggle back and forth between this list, but it's position, size, duration, cloning, cropping, aspect ratio offsets, pan and zoom, motion, transparency, borders, and drop shadows. Lots of stuff. So it's anything you can apply to a window or a pip or a layer in the simulator. Okay. I'm going to go ahead and toggle back to the interface here. Now I'll go ahead and clear my screen. And so to start off here, we're going to do this kind of a little bit kind of granular and lead up to these things. So I'm just going to simply drop a layer on the screen here, and I'll go ahead and move it to the correct pixel space I want, get it centered up, and then I'll zoom in on it a little bit like this so we can actually see. Now notice when I just click on a source over here in the property panel, all I see is the source tab. We get thumbnail information, we get router inputs, we get the config name, and then some preferences down below as far as I'll explain later what a preferred treatment is, a preferred layer, some stereo options, linear keying, and then backup stuff. And we'll talk about those things when we talk about sources. But notice, since that source is applied to a layer now, if I click on the layer instead, I get all of these other menus. Okay, and I'll collapse the source one, input configuration menu, and then there's the keyframe menu. So if I were to toggle back real quick and look at that slide right there, positions right up there at the top, right? So I got to get used to this toggle here. So if I were to select this layer, you can see right here, size and position. There's an X and a Y position. So that is the relative coordinate position that references the center of the layer to the center of the pixel space that it's loaded in. So that layer is in the middle of the main screen. So notice its values are set to 0, 0. If I were to change the X position to 1, notice that the center of the layer jumps to the right edge of the pixel space. If I were to put a negative value, it moves to the opposite side. Okay, I'll return that back to 0, and that puts it to the center. Same with the X and Y. I'm sorry, the Y. Positive values go down, negative values go up. So as I grab this layer and start moving it around, you can see those values changing in real time, right, to the millionth decimal point, which is awesome. So simply just putting it at 0, 0, that puts it dead center. Now that's dead center to that pixel space. If I were to zoom back out, right click, move to the alt program, and then notice the values change slightly because based on their relative coordinates, that is slightly higher than the other one. So if I were to recenter this 0, 0, now it's in the center of the alt program. So there's a big difference. Keyframes are pixel space specific, right? So they're always in relation to what pixel space they're in. So let me pop that back in here, and we'll talk about treatments in a minute here. But so position. Now in Studio, we added a feature just not all that long ago to have absolute position X and Y, right? And that references the upper left corner of the layer in relation to the pixel of the pixel space. So if I were to say under width here, under X position, put 0, notice that layer butts up against the left edge of the pixel space. Same thing for Y. Now it's up to the top left. This is really great when you're trying to position content, maybe multi-channel content on an LED wall where things repeat themselves or certain content data doubles on multiple channels. You can say, I want this layer to start at exactly this pixel. So that's something that's nice. Unfortunately, this feature is not available in Christie Advanced for the X20, okay? So this is something specific to the X80. Now, next, width and height. Now, if you've had some experience here with Spyder for a little bit, you've known that the only way we really adjust the size of a layer is based on its width in pixels. So that's always been right here, and that's in both Christie Advanced and Studio. The nice thing in 5.4 of Studio, we added the ability to change things by their height as well. And you'll notice in the property panel that there's a little aspect ratio lock button similar to the one in the new configuration GUI or manager that we can adjust that. So now I can adjust a window by its vertical size. So if I wanted to go 1080 or if I wanted to go 2160, okay, I could resize that by the height, which is pretty handy. We've recently discovered, especially in external protocol and fixed installs. Then you can also unlock that aspect ratio and start playing with these individually. So if I wanted this to be 5,000, it's going to keep the width, and now it's altering the aspect ratio, okay? So keep that in mind. You have that ability to do this, to change the aspect ratio. Now notice I've enabled the aspect ratio again, and if I were to move this layer around now and move it around, it's going to maintain that aspect ratio until I clear it off or correct, mix it off and mix it back on again, and it'll correct that aspect ratio. So let me just put this back to, let's put it to 1920 by 1080. Okay. Another one, duration. Okay. We'll talk about that more when we start showing you how you apply these into a command key, but that's the duration it will take to apply this keyframe. So if we're having layers move from one area of the pixel space to another, when it hits that cue in the script, it's going to say apply this duration. So it's going to either take 10 frames, 60 frames, 300 frames. That's the duration in which it will take to land on that keyframe. Okay. So keep that in mind. There's one right below here called clone. Okay, this has been a pretty cool feature. This is available in every Spyder since the 2 and 300 series. I'm going to load. So one thing to understand with the clone, what it does is it represents the same layer once. We can clone any layer once. So if I were to, I'll just slide this over here, and I'll turn on what we call the mirror clone. And notice we have 2 windows. They both say layer 1 and layer 1. And notice the clone has this yellow title bar. That's how you know that's the clone layer, right? So if I click on this layer, I get the properties, layer properties, source properties, keyframe properties. But on this one, if I were to click on it, notice all I get are pixel space properties because it's as if it's not even there. So it's important to remember that. I cannot clone a source outside of a pixel space. So if I were to move this out, like everybody wants me to do right there, notice it says outside the pixel space, meaning a clone can only happen within a pixel space. So the main screen is a pixel space, but you know what? So is the all program. So that's how we get layers to clone from one, say, house left to house right. Maybe you have a super wide display and you got a presenter up there, and you want to put a layer on the left side so the left side of the audience can see it, you can clone it to the right side so everybody else on the right side can see it. So what I would do on this one is say move to pixel space, apply it to the all program. Now I could say let's go ahead and make it 1920, and now I can use my alignment tools to adjust the layer and go up and then over, and now that layer is cloned across over to house right. Okay, so very helpful feature. You can clone any layer, any one of the 24 layers once. Okay, so that's all you can do. Now, the offset clone, the mirror clone mirrors its position, right? So you see it doesn't necessarily invert the image or flip the image. All it does is inverts the position. So the offset basically starts the clone on top of it, but notice there's simply a slider here where you can offset the layer either to the left or to the right. So if your pixel spaces aren't necessarily symmetrical, okay, maybe you have your DSMs right here, maybe they're extended off to the right. So doing a mirror clone with this layer over here and over here, that layer would end up appearing way over here in the far right in the simulator, out here somewhere. So that's nice because that way you can do it left or right or not necessarily symmetrical. Notice there is no y-axis adjustment. It always has to stay on the same horizontal plane, the clone, okay? Notice, and basically any border or anything you apply to the main layer will also apply to the clone layer, okay? So very helpful helpful tip there. Let's go ahead and clear that off of there and move it over here. Next one, as we go down the list, aspect ratio offset, okay? So every source, when we have our source webinar, has a specified aspect ratio based on its resolution. So 1920 by 1080, 3840 by 2160, those are all 16:9 aspect ratios, or 1.7778. If we want to adjust that for any reason, we can come right down here into the aspect ratio tab under the attributes menu and basically say, all right, I can either offset it a certain value, or you can just simply type in the total aspect ratio. So if I want that to say be 4:3, I can go 1.333, and now that source has been stretched to make it a 4:3:3. It's not going to automatically letterbox anything or stretch the video. It's gonna take whatever that signal is and just simply stretch it out. In inverse to that, if I were to make it super wide, maybe 2.35, it'll make it super skinny, right? So if I wanted to stretch something to this screen right here, I would know that that screen is 6480 by 2160. So I can do a little quick AV math here, find my calculator, and do 6480 divided by 2160 gives me an aspect ratio of 3. Hey, that's a nice round number. So we could just change our aspect ratio right here to 3.0. And now if I were to take this and make it 6480, whoops, that's the position, my bad. Size 6480, and then center that, and that should fit right in the top, right into that screen, okay? So that is the aspect ratio adjustment. Now notice all of the, when we get into the, oh, I skipped right over crop, I didn't even see that, sorry, my bad. If I want to reset that, notice there's a button at the top of this where I can just click on it and go reset, and it'll just remove all the values for that off. Another one here is crop, okay? We can take any piece of content coming in and crop out portions of it, left, right, top, or bottom. Now, there is a very small bug in version 5.4 that hides a little checkbox here down below that allows that layer to stay in its current position and not recenters, because the default behavior is that if I start to apply a top crop here, notice how the window starts to recenter itself. That checkbox below will keep it in the same position, but just simply crop out and not move anything else. But so if I wanted to do show, like, remove any letterboxing or pillar boxing within a source, I could say, all right, let's crop out 20% of the top and say 20% of the bottom, and that's a decimal, right? So 1 would be 100%, obviously 0.5 would be 50, and so on. And there you go, and now I can crop that out and remove any items. If you have a piece of software or something that you're showcasing different panels, like even in advanced, if I just wanted to showcase just the script window, I could crop out everything but that and then resize the layer and position it where I want. I'm purposely skipping over treatments right now because I just want to get through all these and then show you how you can actually recall these things. Pan and zoom, okay? Pan and zoom, the rule here is you have to zoom before you can pan. You can't pan outside of the signal itself. So I can go ahead and zoom in here and you can see the icon will track. And then from there, I can go and pan either left and up. You can see it kind of sliding around in there. And you can actually zoom into a specific area. Then again, rescale or move the layer wherever you want it to go. And again, always the reset button right there to remove any of that. Motion, this plays with some of the defaults, the way our smooth go transitioning. So there's a certain arc with layer movement when it's flying from one position to another. There's no non-linear path movement. It's just a single straight line. But if it were to say, if I were to take this, I can't really show it until I have a command key, but there's a default kind of ease in and ease out for each of these movements, and that kind of plays into the duration as well as how that movement speed is going to arc through the course of the movement. So these are ways to play with doing a customized little kind of movement speed, right? Transparency is a new one that was just added to Studio. This is one where you can actually apply transparency. I'll just use the slider here. And it's basically a 0 to 255 value, but you can actually make that layer 50% opaque. You just basically put 122. Whoops, that was a little bit too much. Let's call it 120. There we go. So that's nice if you want to, and that applies with stills or anything that you apply to a layer. So if you wanted to use that, maybe put a watermark bug in the lower corner of a logo, right? You could just apply that to layer 24, stick it in the corner, give it a 50% opacity, and and if it's on layer 24, whatever comes up behind it, it'll still show a faint, you'll still be able to see through it, okay? So that's something that was relatively new to Studio as well. As I'm moving forward here, there is borders and drop shadows are also a keyframe, okay? But they got to the point where there were so many settings and so many adjustments that they ended up putting in its own tab in the property panel. So if I were to collapse the keyframe tab here and open up the border and shadow tab, now, and I'll also zoom back into this one here, you'll see that we have border settings right here and shadow settings. They're not, they're separated, but it's kind of hard to see where one ends. But basically, every layer has the ability to have a border. So if you apply thickness, you can see as I slide that slider across there, it applies a thickness. Now, we won't be able to see the bezel function on that in the simulator, but you'll see it immediately on the output of the Spyder. So you can actually put a border on there. You can go to the fill tab right here, choose a color, right? You can sample a color, type in the color values here if you need a very specific one. There's also these H and V offsets, right? I'll get to that shape tab in a minute because I'm sure everybody's curious about that. But if you apply this V offset, what it does is it puts a little 45-degree bezel on the left and right side, making one lighter and darker to give an appearance of a shadow. But it's nice to give it the window a little bit of depth, okay? The other one is inside softness, another one that you won't be able to see on the simulator, but what it'll do is it'll feather in that color inward, right? It'll say still be a hard edge, but it'll feather the color in towards the center of the layer, and you can play with that. You also have an outside softness, okay? So now we can feather the outside of the layer. This doesn't apply any color, so you won't see any color on it, but you can actually choose what sides you want to feather out, okay? So you can pick just the left and right. Maybe you're blending layers across a super wide screen, maybe a watch out or a Pandora system, and you want to feather those layers out. You can actually just say, I want to do just the left and right side. Again, you won't be able to see it here, but it would feather in from here, okay? Drop shadows. There's an enable button over here. You turn it on, and notice by default it puts a small one there. You can play with the horizontal positioning of that, so you can go left or right. Anybody has any experience with this? You can put it anywhere now and it doesn't have to redraw it, okay? I can slide this one out, make it a little bit lower. I can play with the size of that border, okay? I can play with the softness of that border. Do I want a nice hard edge or do I want it to be a little bit more feathered in? Also the transparency, right? Do I want it solid or do I want it kind of opaque and be able to see through it? Either way, it's a nice little feature to give a layer some depth, as well as being able to use a color, right? So if I wanted this to be a red shadow, boom, now I have a red shadow to match that border, okay? Again, all of these items are keyframe values, right? So regardless of when you put a source on the screen, boom, that layer now has a set of keyframe values. You know, it's just whether or not like the borders and things are applied or not, okay? So what's an easy way to apply these, okay? These are items that can be very repetitive. The nice thing is that you can save these specific keyframe settings in what we call a treatment, okay? So all of the same items that you see here on this slide, position, size, duration, clone, cropping, all of that stuff can be applied as what we call a treatment, and you can keep a list of these in your system. So over here to the left, where the source panel is, there's another tab there called treatments. Okay, now I have a bunch that are already in there. If I were to go ahead and select this layer, I'm going to change that. For some reason, the red border, I'm just not a fan of the red border. I'm going to put in black. So I like black. There we go. So what I can do is say, you know what, I like that layer. I like its position, at least with respect to where it is in the pixel space. Let's go ahead and just clean it up here. Whoops, it's in the wrong pixel space. So we'll center that back up there. Now, I'd like to save maybe the position of that layer, okay? So what I can do is select the layer, go to the treatment list, and I'll just scroll down and find an empty spot here. Right click on the spot and I get an option to add a new treatment, okay? And it brings up this dialog box to go ahead and give it a name. And I'm just gonna call this center tip with shadow, okay? And you'll see down here below, it says recall options, meaning it's gonna when I save this treatment, it's gonna remember all 10 of those items. Size, you can see all of them listed here. Size, border, clone, position, shadow, all of those things. It's gonna remember all of them, but the checkboxes indicate which ones I want to recall when I apply this treatment. So in this case, let's just say I just wanna remember the position of the layer, okay? So what I'll do is I'll deselect all of these, which is a nice little feature they added. And I wanna say, just remember position, okay? Say okay. And now look, I have, actually the name doesn't quite reflect that. Let's rename that. But notice once it's saved, in parentheses over here, we see PS, meaning stands for position. But if I click on it, the property panel shows me what items are gonna be recalled, okay? So if I were to simply bring a different source onto the screen, drop it here, make sure it's loaded into the correct pixel space, and I go back to my treatment, I can just simply drag that treatment on top of that layer and it's going to remember the position, okay? Now, notice it didn't do the size or the border or anything like that. So here's what I'll do. I'll go back to the same layer and I'll say add new treatment. And I'll call this red border, okay? And again, I'll only choose border properties, okay? And you're going to start to see this. You see the little red dot, a little kind of, it's almost like a little tally saying what items are being applied. So now I could say center pip, red border, and you'll see it gets applied that way. So you can create these individually with any of the keyframe values, right? Meaning position, position, width or size, duration, clone. So if I wanted to remember the clone, I'll pull this back a little bit. Let's load that that source back into the all program. And let me just go ahead and clear all the treatments off of that. Because notice you can also right click directly onto a layer, because again, there's 2 or 3 ways to do everything here. I can right click on that layer and down here there's a list, there's an item for treatments, and I can come right here and see a list of all of my treatments and just simply apply it directly to that layer. So let's say I wanted a treatment for clone, for a source to be cloned from house left and house right. So what I would do is make sure that my layer is is the correct size. So I'll make it 1920. I'll go ahead and position it over where I want it using these alignment tools. I'll apply the mirror clone, and I'll say right click. Another way to add a treatment is to right click, go to treatments, come up here and say save as treatment. And on this one, I'm going to call it mirror clone. Okay. And on this one, the items that I'm going to remember are size, position, and clone. Okay. So I'll say okay. And now if I were to take everything off here, I grab a source, drop it on here, right click, treatments, and on the very bottom, I have my mirror clone, and there it is. Okay. So very easy way to apply treatments. Let me get in here and just put this next to this so I can see them all. So now you'll see that I've broken open those two panels so I can see them side by side. A nice thing that you can do that you unfortunately you can't do in advance. This is a studio feature. Is that notice I've got all these already built in here. I've got duration 15 frames, 30 frames, size 1280, 1920, 1440, 3584. These are all things that me personally I use on a pretty regular basis during training. Centered, black border, red border, yellow border, green border, drop shadow, lower right, lower left, upper right. And notice for every one that I have for like a border, I have another one that says no border, right? Meaning I saved a treatment with a 0 value, which allows me to remove anything that I've applied to that layer for that particular item. But my point being is that I can go into this treatment right here, say this duration treatment. I can right click on it, and you can say, actually before I go beyond that, sorry, jumping around again. What if this layer, maybe I needed to make an adjustment to a treatment that I've already made. I could make an adjustment and then come right down here and say relearn that treatment. Okay, so you can, if you need to make adjustments, or if you wanted to go in and say, I want you to also recall different items, go ahead and recheck these boxes. And when you created the treatment, it will then go ahead and apply whatever values that they were that you chose. Okay.
Hey, Peter, question.
Yeah, sure.
When you update a treatment, will it affect all the other layers throughout the system?
I think I know the question. Is saying if you update a treatment, if that treatment's applied in multiple command keys, will it update all the command keys? And the answer to that is no, it will not. You will have to go and reapply that treatment to any command key that has that particular look or effect. That's a kind of a bummer, but that's the way it's been and that's the way it is for now. So I wish I had a better answer for you.
And another question is, can you delete more than one command key at a time in the treatment panel?
Good question. I don't think I've ever tried to do that. Let me just try this real quick. No, you cannot. So let me show you some of the things. So you see me being able, so that was a question that came in. Somebody asked, can you delete multiple questions or multiple treatments? Notice I can select these, right? And if I right click, there's an option here to save to file. This is something new in Studio. It allows you to save a specific treatment externally from the configuration. Now I've done videos on this and posted about it in Facebook before. So if I wanted to say, I want to save that 15 frame duration, I can say save as a file, and I'll just save it to my desktop here, and I'll call this 15 duration. And notice it comes down here and it creates a treatment file called .str. Say okay, that's awesome. Or you can actually say, select one, scroll down and hold the shift key and grab onto a bunch of them, right click, save to file. And I'm gonna call this master treatment list. So now I can create a bunch of them that I use on a regular basis, a daily basis or a show basis, and say, that way, whenever I build a new config and I have 0 treatments, I can just say right click, and then I'll show you how to do this right down here. Right click, add from file on an empty block, go to my list, pick that treatment file, and it will import those into my configuration. So that's a super cool feature because in the past you would have to rebuild them all, right? Borders, drop shadows, sizing, those are things that are probably relatively consistent with each config, or pretty generic. Or if you have one that has, for our stadium customers, they're driving big LED screens, scoreboards, where they're taking one piece of content in and then simply putting multiple items, elements into that signal, and then cropping it out and then positioning it on the scoreboard somewhere like wings or a ticker or stats or something like that. And a treatment works perfectly in that because it will always take that file or take that crop and that sizing and that position and make it consistent every time, right? Or in case someone inadvertently moves the layer out of position on accident, you can quickly just reapply the treatment and it'll just snap back to its original position. Okay. Any other questions before I kind of take off here? Not end, but just move on to move forward.
Yeah, there's a question about using the treatment. Can you make a copy of the treatment to go from one X80 to another? I mean, you just talked about the save as file function, but copying and pasting isn't a feature of that, right?
Well, so there's you're talking about moving a layer from one position to another. I think that was the question.
Treatment from X80 to another X80.
Oh yeah, for sure. Yeah, just from the function I just did, from the save to file.
Yep. But there's not a copy paste function. It's literally you're saving as a file and just ingesting into the next X80.
Absolutely.
Same with like a backup X80. You can load it that way, or I don't know if hot sync backup would pull treatments as well.
It should. Yep. That's part of the values of that. So that's the best way. I mean, you could back up. Yeah, you could back up the entire configuration that has all the treatments in it, and then just simply restore that. But if it's for a new show and you have different destinations, that probably wouldn't work, because especially if they're position treatments, like center or left or right or down, a lot of those are going to be relative coordinates, right? So if your pixel space is a different dimension, it's going to be slightly different from there. But things like size, 1280, 1920, 3840, borders, drop shadows, those things where they're fairly generic, those are great items to be able to just collectively group up together in one file, and then you can ship them off and save them, send them to somebody if they need them. Okay. So how do you apply a treatment? Okay. Obviously, you saw me, I had layers out here, right? And I could just simply take the layer and say, well, I want it 1440 or I want it 3840. I can just drop it on there. But how does it relate to, say, a command key? So if I go in here and start to create just a blank command key, I'll call this look 1, right? And I'll go ahead and make this relative. And I'm going to drag a new item in here. I'll do my due diligence here and convert it the way I like it and put it on the main. Let's put it on the all program here. So I start this. Now, what's cool is I've started this command key. I've got a layer on the screen. It's editing in real time, right? There's some cool things you can do. So let's say I want this layer to be right there, okay? But maybe I want it to, what's the best way to describe this? Maybe I want it to fly in, right? Or have some cool little an effect. So there's a way you can actually, if you come down here into the element, there's a little square box in the upper right corner of the element in each queue. Okay, so on Q1, that mixer element has a little box there on Q1 and on Q2. If I were to simply just right click and say add keyframe on that first queue, what that allows me to do is that I can actually go in and I'll clear this and I'll take this to preview first. Okay, now you can see it remembered where I want that layer, right? But what I'm going to do is I'm going to edit the preview queue, and I'm going to say I'm going to move this layer up and off the screen. And you'll get the idea here in a second. So if I were to clear, and I'll scroll back a little bit here, so you can see what's going to happen. If I were to go preview, notice the layer remembered where my preview queue was, but watch when I hit program, it flies in. So you can do cool little fly-ins like that, but just know that it's crossing over the entrance duration. So depending on what speed it is, you may see it. You're going to see it fade on, or fade on and then fade off, depending on how you do it. But basically, at that point, if I want that layer to be in a very specific position for that command key, I can just say, okay, because I'm in a live edit mode here. Okay, maybe I want that mirror clone, right? So I can go over, find my mirror clone one. It's in here somewhere. Oh, Peter, there we go. Drop it on there. Remembers that. Clear, preview, take. And notice it remembered that original position. So you saw it fly in from up here. So you want to be cautious with that stuff. So you really want to make sure you understand the mechanics of how the scripting window works, which we will get into in a future date. Okay. But what I could do is go preview and maybe make this, let's just make this 1920. And I'm going to put it right over here. And now if I were to clear, preview, boom. And you can play with those items. So there's a bunch of things you can do. Treatments, again, are a way to recall a very specific keyframe or apply a very specific keyframe into a layer, which could, again, as you start to build your command keys and you want to start positioning, remember the whole slick function, right? The source, layer, pixel space, source, layer, keyframe, one more time, people. The 4 things you got to think about: what source, what layer it's going to, what pixel space it's being loaded to, and what keyframe values you want to apply to that layer for every item that you're going to be putting into your command key, right? Or to your preset. All right. Let's see. So if I were to create, let's create another one here called look left, right? And again, we'll make this relative. And I'll put in a source right here on layer 1. And I'm going to load it to the all program. And I'm going to say I want it 1920. I'm going to use my alignment tools to just pop it over there. Now I could create a treatment right here and say this is house left, meaning 1920 wide, justified to the up left. But I'm not going to do that just yet. So I'm going to create one command key with that layer right there. And then I'm going to clear. And then I'm going to create another one. Call it look right. Again, relative. And I'll take the same source, put it on even the same layer. Whoops, didn't want that. Put it to the all program. Okay, again, make it the same size. But now I want it to go up and to the right. So now, preview, take, let's zoom this in a little bit here. And now, if I were to go directly to program on my next one, it's going to apply that keyframe and simply fly that layer to that position, or fly it to that position, or fly it to that position. Now, this is where you can really start playing with anything in the keyframe menu to adjust this, right? So maybe when it comes from here to here, it's going to take a much shorter amount of time, maybe 10 frames. So if I go back to this one, now if I come here, it should go really fast. Whoops, there we go, really fast, right? Slow to that one because this one has a 60 frame duration. This one has a 10 frame duration. Okay, again, if I want anything, if I want to change this, I'm editing the command key, I can resize, throw a border on that, throw a drop shadow. Where are my drop shadows? Lower right. Okay, now if I go to here, It takes all that stuff off. I come back, take 1 second to apply it all, and there it is. Now keep in mind, I'm taking a source, an HD source, all right, so that's a Pandora source, and I'm scaling and flying it across 3 different destinations, some with multiple outputs, okay? So this is something that we've been doing for a long time, right? All the way back to the 2 and 300 series using the all program pixel space. So if I were to go something like this birds content, that is UHD. So let's say we want to change the source in that. I could do something real quick here. Let's make that bird. So I'll just go ahead and change the command key here to reflect, a different source, boom. And then here's another little add-on I'll do is I'll go ahead and convert that to a mixer. Okay, I'm gonna go ahead and launch this back and I'm gonna convert this one, convert this one to a mixer. So now clear, preview, take, got layer 1, layer 2, because it's a mixer, and now I can preview the next look right here. You can see it's going to preview that transition. I hit program. This should take 10 seconds, or I'm sorry, 10 frames to simply fly over there. Right? Same going the other direction. Preview this, take. Now I'm crossfading an HD source on one layer on one destination, and actually let's change the speed on this one to something a little bit longer. How about 300 frames? So we'll clear, preview, take. Now preview. Now it should take 5 seconds for that to slowly go across, crossfade, morph to its new position. And now I went from an HD source on one destination to a 4K source on the next destination. Okay. That's a quick overview. I didn't think this was going to be a super long subject, but I'll just double check. I'm just glancing at questions if there's anything that I should be looking at here. Any other questions so far? Or anything maybe someone might think I might have missed? I'm sure there's a few people out there that probably have some opinions or some input on that. Anybody, anything? Pretty quiet out there.
Hey, Peter, what do you use as best practices when you're creating treatments? Because there's always in SPY, there's always like 3 different ways of doing the same thing, right?
Yeah.
In software. So, like if you're going to create a treatment, what's the quickest way that you do it?
Quickest, well,
or easiest, or just your
easiest,
flow?
Quickest, yeah, easiest, quickest. Those are relative terms. So the reason there's multiple ways to do this is because not everybody works the same way, and we get that. So it's whatever process you like, right? So the 3 different ways to create a treatment is the one thing you got to remember is you got to have it applied, right? The desired look for that treatment, you have to apply it to a layer first. Then from that point, you can come over here, right click on any position in the treatment list and say add new, and basically that dialog box pops up and you figure out what you want to save. You can right click here, treatments, save as a treatment. I kind of like just selecting the layer, going to the right, saying add new treatment. That's one of the quicker ways to do that, okay? Another thing you can do is if you've got multiple layers out here, let me just bring a couple things out here and just make them all kind of different size for whatever they are. If I have multiple layers selected, I can come over here and double click on a treatment. It'll apply it to all of them at the same time. Okay, so you have multiple layers that you want to apply the same treatment to, sizing or borders. That's probably the most appropriate one. Positioning and stuff, maybe not, but you know, again, I drag all 3 of those out there if I were to put that widescreen, wherever the mirror clone, right? Now they're all going to go over there, right?
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So anyway, I mean, I don't think there's a right or wrong way. There's just different ways, and you know, in that particular instance, there's only a couple ways to do it, and it's just whatever works best for you guys.
Now, shape was being asked about shape. Now, shape isn't a treatment, right?
Shape is a border, so yes, it is a treatment.
Okay.
So here's the thing. So if I apologize, I skipped over that. I'm glad I've got two people watching my back here, making sure I don't forget anything, or actually the entire audience, making sure I don't forget anything. Thank you. If I were to select a layer, go over here to the borders and drop shadows, you saw here settings for the thickness and offsets, the color, but then there's a shape function. If I drop down the list and choose a shape, you'll see we have a little library there of built-in shapes. Now this doesn't require any third party, it just basically keys out those edges, and you can see you get little bursts. You got we have a circle, finally, woohoo, we have a circle, right? Oh wait, look at it, stretched out, that's okay. But now we got an option down here to say uniform, boom. Now we got a circle, okay? It only took 15 years, so I'm kidding. But now you've got all these other ones that you can apply. Now, these shape files, they're still images basically that are being used. We're basically loading a still to mask that video source. In the past, the X20's still performance, which most people would agree that it left room for improvement, right? Because the way it handles stills internally, because this is a still function, it would take time to load these things, and it wasn't always the most elegant way to come onto the screen. But with the X80, the still performance was dramatically improved, and which makes these borders that we have, these shape files, excuse me, goodness, my apologies. It makes these much more usable and much more functional, that you can use them in scripting, and that you don't have to worry that it's going to come up or it's going to take longer than a couple of seconds to actually apply it. But it just makes them way more usable. There's also an option in here for a custom file. This is something that's very one-off. I can refer everybody to a YouTube video that our developer Derek created to create your own shapes. It's basically a vector-based file that you can go in there and create those files, and you got to paste that information in. But anyway, that's how you would create a shape file. So if you wanted it as a treatment, I could just say, all right, let's make a thought bubble there. I want to make the border red. I'll put on some thickness on that. You can see that. Maybe even put the drop shadow on there as well. And the shadow will follow the shape, okay? And then come right over here, add new treatment, call this thought bubble with red border. Very descriptive. We'll do border, shadow, might as well do size and position as well. And save, and now that is saved, that I can then go remove that, bring a different source out. Let's do like this one, and just simply drop that on there. It'll boom, mix that on there. Okay. Any other questions?
Hey, Peter.
Hi,
So
Jason.
it's not exactly a treatment, but we're being asked, can you show keying, so linear keys and chroma keys?
In a virtual mode, the way we're doing these webinars, it's very difficult to effectively show that, and that's really a source subject, meaning when we talk about sources, I plan on doing that one in a fashion that I can actually show you the physical output of the spider, right? Because that's really the way I would prefer to show you guys that, okay? Fear not, I will talk about that, but I'll talk about it under the guise of another webinar about specifically sources. Yes, we do handle keying, chroma keying, a luminance keying, and then a true linear key, which is a cut and fill. And we'll make sure that we have a nice demonstration for that, where you can actually see the physical output of the spider and see what it looks like. Okay.
I got a question. This grid question: Is there a way to apply a treatment to a layer before you drop a source into it?
Yeah, I suppose you could. Let me just put this back out here. Notice in the script window where I don't have any sources applied to a specific layer. Once you apply a source to a layer, it kind of sticks to that layer until you change it, right? It doesn't affect when you launch a command key if it's a different source, but notice if I right click and say add layer 1, layer 1 currently has PB dual 2 in it, right? So if I go add layer 1, boom, that's what's going to appear in that layer. If I go right click add layer 14, notice 14 doesn't have anything in it. So if I say 14, boom, it puts in this blank layer. I could put the thought bubble on that. That's a good question. I've never tried to apply that particular one, but let me just see something real quick. 1920, red border. Might not be able to do that because I think it may need to reference the resolution for the thickness and everything. So I would probably avoid that if possible. If there's a practical application that you think that needs to be done, by all means, email me directly and I'd be happy to chat about it with you. Okay. Any others? No?
Okay, let's see. I think we captured the questions pretty well.
Okay. Okay. Well, like I say, we're doing our best to get these webinars produced. I've been editing them slightly, adding some call outs and some, visual things to grab your attention to where I'm pointing and clicking. So that may be part of the delay. I try to get that done within the same day or within the next day, and then get them posted up to the Christie YouTube page. So keep an eye out for that. Thanks again. Thanks for coming. Again, feel free to reach out to me directly if you have any questions. I will paste the link to the uploaded video to YouTube in the original Facebook and LinkedIn posts. So just keep an eye on those, all right? Thanks, everybody, and we'll talk to you soon.